In this video, we're going to be talking about how to pull in outside images and use a technique in Illustrator to create vector graphics from bitmap graphics. This can be really useful if you have, say, a photograph that you're trying to convert to a more stylized or cartoonish look. If you have an existing logo that maybe you want to use for inspiration, or if you just simply want to create some interesting looking vector graphics, this is the way to do it. So I'm going to start by going File, Place, and I'm going to find my bitmap graphic. So here's one right here, and I'll place it. So just like before, we use the place to embed these files within our Illustrator file, and they will stay linked with our Illustrator file once they're placed in here. Now we're going to be using the image trace button right over here. We can also access this by going to Window, Image Trace. And Image Trace is going to trace our picture and create vectors from that. Now I'm just going to leave this on the default settings and hit Trace. And it's going to tell us this is a really big image. Do you want to do this? I'm actually going to hit Cancel. This is one of the few cases where it may be better to use a slightly lesser quality image. Just to show you how to do that, if you do get that pop-up, that warning, for this demo I'll do this. You don't have to do that. You can keep it high quality. You can try and play around with it, but sometimes you're going to have to reduce the quality in order to get a good result. You simply go Object, Rasterize, right? We're rasterizing this by converting it from a smart object into a rasterized image. And you can just say OK, and now it's rasterized. It's a little bit pixelated, that's fine. I'm just doing this for speed. So I've gone Window, Image Trace. Alternatively, if you click Image Trace over here in the context sensitive menu, it'll just ask you for a preset and you can just say default, that's fine. But let's go Window, Image Trace to get all the options. So it's on default, and I'll click Preview, and it gives me a preview of its result. So right now it's trying to trace the rasterized image and give us these vector results. Let's talk about a few of these menus. By the way, if you did the image trace by clicking over here, you can get to this window simply by clicking this button that says Open the Image Trace panel. We need to be modifying all of these settings. Yours might look like this. You can just twirl this down. We need to modify all of these to get a really good result. Image trace is definitely something that you have to fiddle with quite a bit. So first, there's a series of presets here, and there's also a series of presets at the top of the screen. So if I click this, for instance, this is high color, low color, grayscale, black and white, and line art or outline. Oh, and the first one is auto color. I'm going to go ahead and turn that back to default. This is just the default image trace option. Then we have the view option right here. We can view the results. This is what it'll look like after we traced it. The result with outline. This will give us some outlines that we can use to check up on and make sure that it's tracing the right stuff. Outlines. This will just give us the outlines. Outlines with source image, which I actually find to be one of the more useful presets. And then source image if we just want to view the original image. So I'm going to go back to tracing result. Then we have a mode. Black and white is the default. Grayscale will give us a bunch of different vectors with varying shades of gray. And color, which will give us the same thing but in color. So the use cases for each of these is kind of different. Color and grayscale are really used whenever you're not going to be doing a lot of modifications to the image. So for example, like if I wanted to actually have this kind of posterized look, I would use color or grayscale. Black and white is typically what you'll use if you're trying to produce, for instance, logo art or line art that you're going to come in and modify. So let's switch it over to color. We'll do this first one in color. And we have a palette option right here. So we can do automatic, which will give us a pretty wide range of the palette. Limited, which will try to limit the palette to kind of one range of tones. Full tone, which as you can see, that's almost like a photograph. and document library where we can choose a color palette. This can be really fun to mess with. So for instance, if we use this document library, we go to our libraries panel, and let's use that fun one that we used before. Now it's tracing it in that color, which is fun. Okay, I'm going to just switch this back to limited, because I kind of like the limited palette here. Below that we have the number of colors, so it's 2 on this side and 30 on this side. So if it's at 2, it's going to be black and white. As you move it along, it's going to allow more and more colors and create a more and more complex image. So if I want a simple image, I might go with something really low. If I want a more complicated image, I might go with something really high. I'm going to just leave it in the middle. Then we have this advanced menu right here. So we have the paths. So this is how many paths are we creating. If we have it really low, it's fewer paths. See, so it has more straight lines, more geometric shapes. If we have it really high, we're going to get more detail, and there'll be more curvy paths. Put that somewhere in the middle for now. Then we have corners. We have more corners, so that it'll kind of reduce the noise that we were getting before, or less corners, more curvy, wrapped around shapes. Again, I'll just put that in the middle. Finally, we have noise, which basically will ignore areas that are small or high detail. So this is how you really change the detail. So it's at 1, you're going to get a lot of noise, right? A lot of little tiny pieces here and there. If we turn it way up, we're going to have fewer and fewer pieces. Then we have the method. We're not going to mess with this too much. This is fine. And then in the other settings, we have some other things here that we can play with later. Snap curve to lines. This will try to straighten lines. So if you have that on, it makes it more geometric. If you have that off, it makes it less geometric. And then you have ignore white, which will ignore white parts. Down here, this gives us some info. So we have 563 paths, 17 colors, a lot of anchor points. Yeah. So I'm just going to uncheck preview now at this point and click trace just to make sure that it went through. And now we have traced our image. So this is great. We have this lovely graphic, but it's not actually editable yet. This is because it's still in an image trace format. So for instance, if I double clicked this to go to isolation mode, it gives me this image tracing up here. So it's not an actual vector group yet. We have to click it and then click expand right here. Whenever we expand something, that means that we convert it to all of its different paths and outlines. So now you can see all those outlines getting highlighted. If I go into isolation mode by double clicking, I'm now in a group. I can select each part of that group. So for instance, I could delete this background and delete this kind of weird border that happened here. One of the things that you'll definitely want to do if you get into image tracing is taking these images into Photoshop first and just cleaning them up. So for instance, I could have saved myself a lot of trouble there if I took this into Photoshop and made a quick mask of like the actual planet and left the background transparent or blank so that I'm only working with the planet that I want. So now that it's expanded, I can click on each of these and come in and manually adjust the fills and things like that. Do all the typical modifications that you'd be able to do. So this can be a really, really powerful tool just for making some interesting shapes, just kind of playing around. We can exit the group by just hitting this twice. And now we have this great vectorized image that we've created.